On the quiet streets of West Haven, Utah, where children ride their bikes beneath tree-lined roads and neighbors smile from their porches, there once was a name that brought light. Gavin Peterson, 12 years old, at school. He was known as the happiest kid obsessed with Pokemon cards, Nintendo games, and the color blue. But after 2019, Gavin disappeared from every family photo, from his classroom, and even from the memory of his father's co-workers, people who didn't even know he had a son. Then, in July 2024, that absence erupted into a truth no one could deny. When paramedics were finally called, they did not find the happiest kid his teachers once knew, but a body so emaciated it left even the most seasoned professional shaken. It was the moment every layer of concealment collapsed. And the community realized Gavin hadn't disappeared. He had been erased from life, right before our eyes. From here. An agonizing question lingers: how many warning signs were ignored? And what does that say about us neighbors, teachers, agencies, and an entire society entrusted with protecting children? Before going further, I must be clear this is not a story that's easy to hear, but it must be heard. Because Gavin no longer has the chance to tell his own story, and it is compassion, the courage to face the truth, and the determination not to let this tragedy fade into silence. That is why this story must be told. We remember Gavin, and from his loss, we must find the strength to protect other children before it is too late. Gavin Hansen Peterson was born on January 15, 2012, in Ogden, Utah, the youngest of 3 siblings. Everyone who met him remembered him for a rare innocence and kindness. Gavin loved the color blue, cherished his Pokemon cards like treasures, and never forgot to say thank you for a meal, though sometimes that was the only meal he had all day. To neighbors and friends, his smile was the sound that lit up the whole street on summer evenings. The greatest source of love Gavin had was from his mother, Melanie. She was a gentlewoman, working part-time at a small shop to raise 3 children. But she never missed an evening with them. Every night she told Gavin a story about a knight and a kind dragon, then kissed him goodnight. In those quiet moments, Gavin would whisper his dream that one day he would become a game designer, creating a world where everyone is happy and safe. A simple dream, but one that revealed what life would never grant him. From the outside, the Peterson family appeared to be an ordinary household. They were seen at community events, present at school functions, and people thought they were managing well with 3 children. But behind that facade of stability were pressures, less visible financial struggles, relationship tensions, and unresolved psychological issues. In 2013, when Gavin was barely more than a year old, the marriage fell apart. For a child, divorce isn't just numbers on paper, it is the sudden collapse of a familiar world. A year later, Shane, Gavin's father, quickly entered into a new marriage with Nicole Scott. On paper, it looked practical, a 2-income household, seemingly more stable than a single mother working retail. The court agreed. But financial stability does not always mean safety. For Gavin, that was the first turning point in his life. He had no say in where he would grow up, and he could not know that from that moment on. His childhood would hinge on superficial judgments and adult decisions. Gavin's story whispers to us a simple but vital truth. Children need more than a home that looks stable from the outside. They need love paired with real protection, and without it, even the most reasonable decision can be the beginning of tragedy. By 2016, the cracks in Gavin's world began to show. From 2016 to 2019, teachers at West Haven Elementary School started noticing changes in Gavin and his sister Milani that were difficult to explain. Children, once eager to join in now, withdrew into themselves. Some days, Gavin happily shared his lunch, but on others, he quietly picked food out of the trash when he thought no one was watching. One March day in 2018, teacher Jennifer Patterson recalled Gavin asking, "Is it normal for kids to sleep on the floor without a blanket?" An innocent question, but behind it was a plea for help. Instead of triggering an urgent response, it was filed away as just another note, a meaningless piece of paper. And here, the tragedy began when a child's voice is reduced to a line in a record. The first opportunity for protection is lost. It wasn't only Gavin. Milani also displayed signs that should not have been overlooked. In 2016, doctors noted unexplained bruises on her arms and back. At first, she said it was from falling off a bike, but in one counseling session, Milani admitted her stepmother Nicole often became angry and was very strict, then quickly retracted her words. It was the classic reaction of a child caught between the desperate need for help and the fear of retaliation. That fragile confession should have been held onto. Instead, DCFS closed the matter with a thin safety plan, instructing that Milani not be left alone with Nicole. A paper fence against a storm, utterly incapable of shielding her from harm. Even outsiders had heard the warnings. Neighbors reported repeated screams echoing from the Peterson home at night. But as so often happens, these were dismissed as family matters, yet when children are involved. Adult silence is not neutrality, it is complicity. Those repeated screams rang out like alarm bells, but no one truly stepped in. In 2018, Gavin came to school with a visibly infected finger untreated for days, perhaps a week. The school nurse insisted he be seen by a doctor, but Nicole brushed it aside. He's just looking for attention. Soon after, Gavin began hiding cookies and fruit inside his desk, stashing food in his backpack. Every cookie he hid was not just food, it was evidence of a childhood forced to learn survival within his own home. To the adults, it should have been a clear sign. Instead, it was dismissed as acting out. Between 2016 and 2019, DCFS received 7 separate reports about the Peterson family. 7 chances for intervention. And 7 times the door was shut with cold phrases like unsubstantiated or the family is acting appropriately. No private interviews with the children, no effort to connect the dots, no holistic review. Each closed file was another door slammed, sending the children back into the most dangerous place of all. In this case, the number 7 was not just a count of reports. It was 7 times the system turned its back. By 2019, Milani could no longer bear it. She fled to her biological mother's home, recounting how she had been forced to eat mustard sandwiches, stand with her body stretched for hours, and had her head shaved as humiliation. This was no longer a vague signal, it was a desperate, blaring alarm. Yet even then, the system stayed silent. And it was that silence, step by step, that turned cracks into a chasm, pushing Gavin and his sister closer to irreversible tragedy. Every closed file represented a child sent back into danger. Every dismissed report was a lost chance. The tragedy is that the signs were not subtle. They were so clear that many adults heard them, yet still chose silence. And that silence did not belong to the Peterson family alone. It reflects a familiar pattern when relatives dismiss sudden changes. When communities shy away from intervening because it's private business, warnings slowly vanish. For children, an unexplained bruise, an innocent-sounding question, or an unusual habit is never just a phase. It is their only way of crying for help. And when that cry is reduced to a line in a forgotten file, a deadly void begins to form, and Gavin, like Milani, was left inside it. From 2019 to 2023, what happened to Gavin was not a series of sudden events, but a predictable progression. Child welfare experts call it a straight line from abuse to torture. And what is most striking, the system stood face to face with opportunities to stop it repeatedly and did not. After Milani was taken in by her biological mother, Gavin became the replacement target. Recovered messages from Nicole's phone revealed an escalating hatred. What began as punishments for minor mistakes, forced standing for hours, skipped meals quickly evolved into systematic torment. In Nicole's eyes, Gavin was no longer a child, but a burden, an obstacle, as she herself wrote. In a February 2023 exchange with Shane, Nicole's cruelty was laid bare. Every day I hate him more. I wish he would disappear. This was not a fleeting outburst. It was the language of dehumanization, the way abusers rationalized brutality, by stripping their victim of humanity first in thought. And that language did not remain on messages. It took form in Gavin's very room. Investigators entered and found a space unfit for human life, bare plywood floors. Strips of tape marking the narrow area where he was allowed to sit or lie. A surveillance camera fixed directly on that space, monitoring his every breath. Windows sealed shut, no light allowed in. A room meant for rest had been turned into a cell. No bed, no blanket, no pillow. Only a cold emptiness reflecting how Nicole saw him, not a child to be cared for, but an object to control. In early 2023, Nicole took another step, withdrawing Gavin from school, shifting him to homeschool. For many families, homeschooling is a personal choice. In this case, it was the slamming of a door, severing the last line connecting Gavin to the outside world. In Utah, homeschooling is almost without oversight, no regular visits, no welfare checks, no mandatory contact with the reporters. A child who had repeatedly signaled distress now vanished from the community's view. Silence became the perfect cover for escalating abuse. Gavin's teachers still speak with regret. They had quietly slipped extra cookies and milk cartons onto his lunch tray. But Nicole strictly forbade it, threatening lawsuits if anyone gave him food beyond his ration. One teacher recalled with a breaking voice, "We could see he was gaunt, trembling when adults approached." But every report disappeared into nothing. And then one day, he was gone. And we knew something terrible had happened. Their helplessness was not only personal, it reflected an entire system, where parental rights outweighed a child's right to live. Inside that house, Gavin was forced to exercise until collapse, denied water even in summer heat, made to stand until his body gave out. His brother Tyler later testified that Nicole compelled him to participate in punishments, threatening he would share the same fate if he refused. This was not only physical cruelty, it was a double-edged torture Gavin enduring the abuse. While Tyler was weaponized as a tool, trapped in fear and guilt of complicity, for Gavin, whippings and starvation were only half the torment. The other half came in poisonous whispers, repeated over and over that no one wanted him, that his mother had abandoned him because he was bad, that if he died, no one would care. It was a calculated campaign of dehumanization, stripping away the last defenses of a child, body and spirit alike. What began as strict discipline had warped into a systematic campaign cutting off social ties, erasing trust, turning a home into a prison. And at this point, the question was no longer only who Nicole was, or why she acted this way. The larger question resounds: how did an entire system, schools, neighbors, child protection agencies allow this to continue, when every sign blared like an alarm bell? Before entering this section, it's important to say this is the part least seen in child abuse cases. It is not complete darkness, but the faint glimmers of people who tried, only for their light to be extinguished by a slow and unresponsive system. Rachel Reynolds, a mother whose child once attended school with Gavin, filed 4 reports. The last time, she sat for hours, documenting every detail: Gavin's body reduced to skin and bone, sunken eyes, his timid posture whenever Nicole appeared. She recalled him once snatching food that had fallen to the ground at a community event. To Reynolds, this was not attention seeking, it was an emergency signal. As a former social worker, she knew exactly what she was seeing. Yet every one of her reports vanished into administrative void. A school nurse also rang the alarm. She documented untreated infections, bruises at varying stages, noticeable weight loss, and Gavin's unusual silence in class. She filed reports, met with administrators, and even called a supervisor directly when she felt ignored. That file later became evidence in court, but by the time it was read aloud, Gavin was no longer there to be protected. Beyond the Peterson home, warning signs echoed. A maintenance worker once saw Gavin staggering under the weight of an object twice his size in the scorching sun. A neighbor heard crying through the walls night after night, only to reassure themselves Parents must know best. They heard, they saw, but each stepped back, waiting for someone else to act. Experts call it diffusion of responsibility, when everyone assumes someone else will intervene. The result is that no one acts decisively. And here, every sign, every cry, every bruise, all were swallowed by collective silence. What remains for us today is a bitter lesson a child can be seen by dozens of eyes, and yet remain invisible if no one dares to protect them to the very end. On July 9, 2024, around 4:30 p.m., paramedics received a call that would expose years of hidden horror and systemic failure. This was the turning point. And to understand it, we must hold a clinical distance. But remember, these details are not shared for shock value. They are told to help recognize medical emergencies in abused children, and to remind us that immediate response can decide between life and death. The 911 call was placed nearly 30 minutes after Gavin collapsed in the bathroom. In that delay, Nicole and Shane did not attempt real help. They exchanged 17 messages. What should we do next, and how should we explain this? At 4:08 p.m., Shane texted, "Is he breathing?" Nicole's reply was chilling breath. Should we wait? A child was dying. Yet instead of desperate pleas for help, the closest adults weighed whether to wait. Those words were not mere text. They were a mirror of frozen indifference, where the instinct to protect should have risen. But silence and calculation prevailed. Before going further, you should be prepared. What follows contains heavy details, but they are crucial for understanding why delayed action can turn a chance at life into a death sentence. When paramedics arrived at 4:47 p.m., they encountered a scene that stunned even the most seasoned responders: a 12-year-old boy in critical condition, weighing only 52 pounds, the weight of a 7-year-old. The lead medic's report described profound emaciation, incompatible with any natural medical condition, coupled with severe dehydration despite available water in the home, multiple untreated infections progressing to septic shock, pneumonia in both lungs, and deep malnutrition inconsistent with random neglect or poverty. On Gavin's arms were clear marks of plastic zip ties. At McCady Hospital, the medical team fought for hours, but cascading organ failure, what doctors termed multi-system collapse from chronic abuse, was beyond reversal. And before turning to the autopsy, pause again. What the medical examiner uncovered is difficult to hear, but in that difficulty lies the deepest lesson: silence and delay in action kill children faster than we imagine. The forensic examination by Dr. Susan Lassie, conducted as part of the official autopsy, revealed findings she later testified amounted to systematic torture consistent with concentration camp victims, a clinical term she had never used in 20 years of forensic pathology. The evidence included not only severe malnutrition, but untreated injuries at different stages of healing, advanced infections left without basic care, and physical markers of prolonged restraint and stress positions. These findings underscored a crucial principle: every parent, teacher, community member, any of us must grasp: when a child disappears from medical appointments, when injuries go untreated, when basic needs vanish, it is not mere neglect. It is an emergency signal, and action must be taken immediately, regardless of parental objections or bureaucratic delays. Gavin's decline had been visible for weeks. June messages between Nicole and Shane complained that he was too weak to work, dismissing his collapse as drama. Now, each of those texts stands as evidence of willful blindness, a deliberate choice secrecy over saving a life. And it was that choice, combined with delay, staging, and cover-up, that sealed Gavin's fate. The investigation following Gavin's death did not only identify the direct perpetrators, but also revealed a larger picture: a cruel scheme sustained over years, and a child protection system that repeatedly failed. Detective Marcus Webb, lead investigator, wrote in his affidavit that the moment he stepped into that house would haunt him for the rest of his career. What he found was no longer mere signs of abuse, but the evidence of a torture apparatus. Before going further, A brief pause is needed. The following details are difficult to take in, but it is precisely their difficulty that shows why communities must learn to recognize warning signs early. Digital forensics recovered more than 3,000 messages, 147 photos, and 23 videos deleted from Nicole's phone. They were not random, they were trophy images, deliberately recorded to document escalating sadistic gratification. One investigator remarked, when abusers begin keeping evidence as trophies, it is no longer about control, it is about cruelty as pleasure. Gavin's room was more accurately described as a cell. Tape lines marked on the wooden floor, 4 cameras mounted at the corners, a hallway lock on the outside of the door, windows sealed against light. Investigators found just one personal item, a hidden Pokemon Pikachu card, tucked beneath a loose piece of plywood. The smiling Pikachu, in stark contrast with the despair surrounding it, became a symbol of the fragile grasp Gavin still held in the dark. The investigation widened to the system itself. DCFS records showed 8 reports filed between 2018 and 2023. All were closed with the same refrains unsubstantiated. Family acting appropriately. In 2023, a social worker even noted an unusual bedroom setup, but accepted the explanation that Gavin was destructive when unsupervised. A 2022 report of severe weight loss was dismissed with a falsified doctor's note. These failures revealed deadly gaps no mandatory review for families repeatedly reported. No comprehensive home checks. And most crucially, no private interviews with the children. Perhaps most shocking was not the injuries themselves, but Gavin's erasure from public life. Shane's co-workers admitted many did not even know he had a son named Gavin. On social media, hundreds of family photos, vacations, celebrations after 2019, yet Gavin was gone entirely. A child disappearing from pictures, from social events, from everyday stories that in itself was a warning bell communities must learn to hear. The trial began in September 2024, for many. It was not just a legal procedure, but the moment the entire community confronted the truth, Gavin did not die in silence. Nicole Lee Scott faced 8 felony charges ranging from aggravated murder, child abuse resulting in death, to obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. From her first appearance, she provoked public outrage, the smirk in her mugshot, her cold demeanor in court, and her lawyer's plea that she was merely a mother, overwhelmed by difficult children. All poured fuel on the fire. Prosecutors swiftly stripped away that facade, presenting message after message, detail after detail, proving this was deliberate, sustained torture. Shane Peterson initially tried to paint himself as the weak husband manipulated by his wife, but the evidence betrayed him. Cold texts discussing food ration cuts, lines expressing disgust toward his son. A March 2024 message read, "He's your problem today. I don't want to see him." His final admission was even more damning. He chose peace in his marriage over his child's life. That was not mere complicity. It was a choice. The case grew more complex as Tyler, Gavin's brother, entered the legal storm. Court psychiatrists diagnosed him with autism spectrum disorder, depression, and anxiety. He was both victim and turned perpetrator. His testimony revealed Nicole's psychological hold: either punish his brother on command, or be punished like Gavin himself. Tyler could not escape the loop of fear and guilt. The decision to release him for treatment instead of imprisonment was an acknowledgement in that house. He too was a victim of manipulation. The climax came when Judge Camille Nider delivered the sentence. She choked up, then broke into tears the first time in 25 years on the bench. This was not abuse. This was torture. This was not neglect. This was the systematic destruction of a child's body and spirit. The verdict for Nicole: 15 years to life, with consecutive terms ensuring she would never leave prison. Shane, 5 years to life, with the judge's searing words, "You are not a father. A father protects. You are the one who chose comfort over your child's life, the one who allowed torture to take place in your home, the one who contributed to the destruction of a boy who only sought your protection. The case of Gavin Peterson was not merely a family tragedy, it was a brutal test, exposing the cracks of an entire child protection system. DCFS records revealed a grim reality: each social worker was burdened with 30 to 40 families, while recommended caseloads were only 12-15, under that weight. Subtle distinctions between discipline and torture were missed. No mandatory procedure triggered when a family was repeatedly reported. No required medical checks when a child was malnourished. And a rigid culture of family reunification inadvertently placed family preservation above a child's survival. Another loophole: homeschooling allowed Gavin to vanish from every outside eye. In Utah, there is no routine monitoring, no mandatory health checks, no requirement for children to appear before a mandated reporter. For high-risk children, withdrawal from school should have triggered an immediate investigation. Instead, Gavin was cut off from community oversight, left fully in the hands of his tormentors. From this case, West Haven passed what became known as Gavin's Law: mandatory background checks on all adults in a household, including partners and extended relatives, compulsory psychological evaluations for anyone with custodial or frequent access to children. Teachers, school nurses, and communities were trained to recognize systematic torture, a pattern distinct from ordinary abuse. Forensic pathologist Dr. Susan Lassie also released new medical guidelines recognizing the syndrome of child torture. Not just injuries, but the constellation of signs: healed wounds at different stages, specific forms of malnutrition, indicators of confinement. Utah hospitals adopted the protocol, and it spread nationwide, ensuring that any child presenting with such symptoms would be protected immediately, rather than sent back into danger. The community's response to Gavin's death was both grief and the seed of change. Thousands of blue balloons, his favorite color, were released into the West Haven sky. Each balloon carried a vow: never again. The Justice for Gavin movement transformed mourning into action. Utah passed laws mandating DCFS response times, criminalizing delays in case handling, and capping social worker caseloads. Schools built safe reporting systems for teachers, even when initial concerns seemed too minor to stand alone. Libraries and community centers became safe spaces where children could seek help. Rachel Reynolds, whose ignored reports had haunted her, turned anguish into action. She founded a community training fund, teaching others to recognize the small signals: a child hoarding food, an injury inconsistent with explanation, a sudden disappearance after an abuse report. Her motto: see something, say something, and keep saying it until someone listens, is now a guiding principle for parents and educators alike. West Haven, once silent, has changed. Neighborhood watch programs now include child welfare checks. Parents created support groups for overwhelmed families. Collective pain has become a new culture: vigilance, protection, zero tolerance for silence. By now, Gavin Peterson should be preparing for 8th grade. He should be trading Pokemon cards, designing games, laughing with friends. Instead, his story became an indictment of a system and a call we cannot ignore. 8 reports were filed, and 8 times they were closed. Each one was a missed chance to save him. We cannot change Gavin's fate, but we can let his light guide the protection of other children. Child protection is not only the responsibility of professionals. It begins with you, the neighbor who hears cries, the teacher who sees changes, the friend who notices a child missing from family photos. Do not dismiss your instinct. Report. Persist. Do not stop until action is taken. Be the voice for children who cannot speak for themselves. Support reforms that close the gaps Gavin fell through. Demanding accountability from the system means protecting children. Remember that behind every statistic is a child who deserves safety, love, and the chance to grow without fear. Gavin's favorite Pokemon was Pikachu. Brave, loyal, always ready to protect friends from danger. In his memory, we must be just as brave in protecting vulnerable children. just as loyal to the principle that every child deserves safety, and just as ready to fight against a system that enables abuse through neglect. Your awareness can save a life today. Share the story not for shock value, but for education and prevention. Talk to your community about recognizing abuse indicators. Support increased funding for child protection services. Demand accountability from the system because that means protecting children. Vote for leaders who prioritize child welfare. Volunteer with organizations that protect children. Because somewhere, right now, another child needs what Gavin never received: someone who will fight for their safety until they are truly safe. Someone who will not give up when the system fails. Someone who values their life above convenience or comfort. The color blue will remain a reminder, not only of loss, but of responsibility. From tragedy, we can transform grief into action, anger into advocacy, and awareness into saved lives. That is the most worthy way to honor Gavin, to build a world where no child endures what he did.